This page blimey takes me back. It's the front cover of N64 Magazine. The cover features a couple of blokes who look like they're straight out of a manga, plugging Konami's Hybrid Heaven. It promises monsters, fights and fear, as well as being an exclusive. Never did get around to completing that one. Smash Bros is on the cover, Mario is getting stuck in with a BMUP. I remember that being a laugh with mates. Zelda's there too, with tips and secrets. Castlevania gets a fantastic review, and FIFA 99, which they claim could be an ISS beta. Well, we'll see about that. There's also a mention of a free Planet Game Boy magazine inside the Game Boy Color days. Plus the magazine is 148 pages. It cost £2.95, March 1999, issue 26. Good times. The next page of N64 Magazine boasts about being Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo magazine. Can't argue with that, can we? There's talk about violence in video games, particularly in Super Smash Bros., which had just come out at the time, and was considered something a bit special back then, and it was the first of its kind on the Nintendo 64. The reviewer mentions being dubious about Mario kicking 7 shades out of Yoshi. Can't say I disagree. Seemed a bit weird at the time. The magazine also mentions Hybrid Heaven, which was an intriguing mix of RPG-style battles, and 3D Zelda adventuring, which was an interesting game at the time, and it was a bit of a puzzle to play, but an enjoyable one. There's also a new Planet Game Boy section, which focuses on the Game Boy Color, which had breathed new life into the handheld market. Other features include a search for Britain's multiplayer champion, a review of Castlevania, Zelda tips, and a look at Michael Owen's Soccer 99. The editor, James Ashton, signs off with a "Watch it, Weaver," which is a bit of an odd remark, but it's a sign of the times. Finally, there's a little promotion at the bottom to flip to page 146 for a full index of the magazine's contents. The next page shows the contents of this issue, dated March 1999. There's a news center section looking at video games affecting your health, plus retro goodies. Coming soon features Monaco Grand Prix, Winback, and Gauntlet Legends. Regular features include An Englishman in Tokyo, where Max puts together his wish list, and the information station, covering releases and charts. Looks like there's even a $5 off a game with Game E. The magazine's next issue is also teased. There is also Planet Game Boy Magazine, which is world's first dedicated Game Boy mag, and it is free inside. Gustaya. The N64 Arena section kicks off with FIFA 99, which they reckon is the best one yet, followed by All-Star Tennis. Chameleon Twist 2 is back, and there's Milo's Astro Lanes, Virtual Pool and Battle Tanks. The Import Arena covers Japanese and American games, including Smash Bros., Castlevania, Golden Nugget, Fox College Hoops, Gomon 2, Snowspeeder, Tetris 64, Doraemon 2, Magical Tetris, Get a Love, Panda Love Unit and Legend of the River King. It's interesting to see the import scene getting some love back then. The next page is a look at what's coming up on the N64. We have Jet Force Gemini, Rare's next big thing after GoldenEye, all new shots of it too, which looked promising at the time, though it was a bit divisive, wasn't it? Then there's Duke Nukem, 0 Hour, Duke's return looking better than ever, apparently. Check Spigs. Then it goes into the N64 Club 64 section. Mailbox is where they print readers' letters. Then there's a guide to Zelda, Ocarina of Time Part 2. Allah. There is a list of the contents in the magazine, including help with F-Zero's Course Ghosts, tips, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, hotline tips, and a competition to win an expansion pack. Other sections include I'm the Best, Skill Club 64, Contacts, a directory of every N64 game reviewed, subs and back issues. Hybrid Heaven gets a feature, described as a promising RPG with space, monsters and goo. Michael Owen's Soccer 99 is also featured, hailed as a serious ISS challenger. Finally, there's a special interrogation feature about the problems people were having getting through Zelda, and the page numbers to find them on. This page from N64 Magazine, dated around 99, is diving into the future look at upcoming games. It kicks off with some behind-the-scenes chatter about Rare and Nintendo of America. Seems like the UK press were getting the inside scoop, much to the annoyance of NOA's big boss Howie Lincoln. Ah, the good old days of transatlantic squabbles. The focus is on Jet Force Gemini, with the reviewer giving their initial thoughts. There's talk of the flying character Floyd, the robot companion to Juno Vela, and their space dog Lupus, and how the coupe mode might work. Screenshots show off some gameplay, including what they think might be a spaceship hidden in the background, a boss that looks like Blastoise from Pocket Monsters, a vehicle that they like the look of, and a Space Harrier-style jetbike level. There's also a brief mention of Duke Nukem 0 Hour, noting that the pig's back and he's looking fabulous. The page concludes by pointing readers to the Coming Soon section for more new game previews, and highlighting that Jet Force Gemini and Duke Nukem feature in the magazine issue. The next page features a future look at Jet Force Gemini for the N64. I remember seeing this preview back in the day. The reviewer mentions how the levels are set on rails like Star Fox, and wonders how a non-split-screen multiplayer would work. Other details leaked from Rare include jetpack, puzzle and flying robot levels, multiplayer levels, hidden characters, and areas only available to certain characters with special skills. It seems you can switch between Juno, Vela, and Lupus mid-mission. A bit like Mystical Ninja perhaps. They anticipate being summoned to Rare's secret offices next month to view the finished game. There are screenshots of Juno in some sort of exobody armor, as well as a tank with a dog in it, who I assume is Crufty. There's also a shot of the characters, which look like they are good to shoot holes in, but I think the reviewer thinks they are cute. The reviewer also points out that Vela has 88 shots left on her red hairdryer. The reviewer calls the color curly. Cheeky. The page also mentions that the game is expected to be released in the UK in May, with the US release date still to be announced. The next page from a 1999 issue of N64 Magazine is a preview of Duke Nukem 0 Hour on the N64. It's making out like the game is proper good. The reviewer seems pleasantly surprised that the move to a third-person perspective hasn't ruined the Duke Nukem feel. There are screenshots dotted about showing Duke in various locations, spouting one-liners, taking on enemies, and generally causing mayhem. The reviewer comments on the lack of fogging, which was a common issue on the N64, and reckons it's down to clever use of the expansion pack-R. There's also mention of the level design, which apparently takes in everything from city-based areas reminiscent of Duke Nukem 64, to post-apocalyptic landscapes, western settings, and even a Titanic-themed level. The reviewer does note that some of the puzzles, particularly those involving key hunts, can be a bit random. Still, he's confident the 0 Hour will be a decent blast. There's a screenshot of Duke looking like Clint Eastwood with a missile launcher. A bit cheeky. This page showcases Duke Nukem 0 Hour for the N64, a game I remember being quite hyped at the time. There's a future look feature on it, and they've played it already, which means it's coming out soon. Eurocom is the developer. Seems like it was slated for a March/April release at the time for both the UK and US. They're showing off some of the hardware, that is, the weapons you'll be wielding. The usual suspects are there. Pipe bomb, freeze gun, sniper rifle, night vision goggles, and of course, the nuke gun. The multiplayer is mentioned, with 9 specifically designed arenas, with 1 being on ice. The reviewer comments on the carnage in-game, which is never a bad thing in a Duke game, is it? There's a comment on one of the levels being dump, too big, and that you just get lost, like you would in Longleat Maze. There's also a note that each player gets a different version of Duke to play as, including Cowboy Duke. Looks like they'll have a proper review next month, so this is just a preview. Finally, it's N64 Magazine issue number 9. Warrington Norcus. The next page is a right old moan about the media and their obsession with video games corrupting the youth. The headline screams video games evil, which is a bit much, even for me. It seems the Daily Mail has been at it again, this time targeting a 2-year-old called Samuel Simpson, who apparently spends 10 hours a day playing GoldenEye. 10 hours? Pull the other one. Even back then I knew that was utter nonsense. The article questions how any parent could be so irresponsible, but it's clearly just sensationalist rubbish, trying to warp the media to fit their ridiculous agenda. I mean, GoldenEye was good, but hardly baby food. The reviewer makes the point that this kid would have to be some kind of genius to complete the missions in GoldenEye, you know the ones, install covert modem, or photograph satellite. Also there is a mention that the Mail intends to buy a portable version of GoldenEye for holiday. The reviewer sarcastically comments that it's as yet unknown outside of the Daily Mail, presumably. Gape, it's all just a bit of a joke really. They even dragged in a psychologist to say the kid should only play educational games. As if. Back then it was all about blasting your mates in GoldenEye, not learning your ABCs. I mean, with 4 million PlayStations and N64s in the country at that time, they thought they'd have more sense than to publish such drivel. The next page kicks off with a piece about Konami's Metal Gear Solid possibly appearing on the N64, though the Contra version was canned, which is a shame. Then there's a bit about a third-party add-on called the Dex Drive, which lets you download game saves from your PC onto your N64 controller pack. All sounds a bit fiddly, doesn't it? It could be used for things like sharing paint jobs in Top Gear Rally, which is good, as customization like that was a big thing at the time. Faye? The big story is about N64 emulators popping up on PC, letting you play games like Super Mario 64 and GoldenEye on your computer. A cool idea, but dodgy as hell because of copyright issues with ROMs, and also because it required an analog controller plugged into a PC for controls. I remember that this was a problem for some of the shooters. Also, it mentions viruses, but it was a novelty idea more than anything for me. The next page has a bit of everything going on, doesn't it? Warrington P. First off, there's a correction corner, addressing a pricing error in the last issue. Something about a steering wheel being listed at the wrong price. Apparently Dattel were none too pleased about their product trademarks being used illegally too, so that's a bit of a drama. Then there's a Turok cheat section with a code to unlock everything in Turok 2, I remember Turok, that was mental at the time, running around blasting dinos with all sorts of ridiculous weapons. Also an appeal to those who are interested in appearing on a TV show called Gamers Wanted, to get in touch with Rick Bronx at Granada Television. There's a fanzine farm section, which highlights some N64 related fanzines. N64 Zone, which is on its 4th issue, NGT, and Extreme Consoles, which is now in color, and Super 64. The main article is about the Zelda Ocarina of Time adverts, with a headline claiming Zelda ad not sexist. Apparently some folk complained about the "Willest thou get the girl or willest thou play like one" slogan, but the Independent Television Commission didn't see anything wrong with it. It also mentions the Zelda ad campaign, a new official N64 Magazine Zelda guide, and how the game sold out in the UK. The next page features a retro world section. Seems Jason Moore is taking us down memory lane with a look at some proper old-school handheld electronic games from Tommy. We're talking about the kind of games that were around before everything went digital. There's Blip, which is basically a handheld Pong game with a single LED representing the ball, and then there's Demon Driver, a driving game where you dodge traffic. They even stuck a steering wheel on the thing. Stunt Bike is just Demon Driver, turned on its side, with barrels to jump over. The reviewer seems to be having a right laugh, tearing these things apart to see how they work. Gee. Elsewhere, there's news of upcoming titles for the N64. Titus is bringing out a Top Gun game and a Kasparov chess follow-up, Take-Two is doing Monster Truck Madness, and Paradigm has an F1 sequel on the way. We can only hope it's better than the last lot. The next page delves into the upcoming N64 games that were on the horizon back in the day. It mentions a few titles in the contents, including Gauntlet Legends, Winback, Monaco Grand Prix, Taz Express, and even some more arcade-style fare, like Looney Tunes Space Race, Shadowgate, California Speed and Carmageddon. The main focus is on Gauntlet Legends, harking back to the old Atari coin-op days, before the SNES even. The reviewer notes it's a 3D update of the classic monster bashing game, with the familiar classes like Warrior, Wizard, Valkyrie, and Archer. Apparently, the Archer is a busty female, replacing the nasty green pixie Cheeky. It mentions that teamwork is essential, and that the expansion pack will be needed for Hire's graphics, and a possible release in May. The reviewer's having a bit of a laugh, saying the Wizard players always think they know a shortcut, and you should just shoot them. Ah, the joys of co-op gaming. There are some screenshots with little captions like, "the same hairdo as Paul," and tasteful floor tile action. The next page, titled Ledge, previews Winback for the Nintendo 64. Seems like Nintendo got involved with Koei's project to add some of their own magic touch. The screenshots shown here suggest a stealthy shoot-'em-up affair. The reviewer notes the game has tweaks to the control system. Hopefully it isn't something that hinders gameplay. There's a mention of Jean-Luc Cougar as the main character, and a few remarks about the game looking like Mission Impossible. The writer remarks about the fogging being pushed back, as it needs to be. There's a small section dedicated to weapons, the reviewer mentioning real-world style guns like pistols, machine guns, gadgets, and explosive things. They also mention that the multiple objectives bear more than a passing resemblance to Rare's GoldenEye game. Let's hope Winback can stand against such a big game at the time. The reviewer humorously remarks about someone's coat, and there's a screen grab that suggests some cranial damage is about to occur. There's some comments about the gameplay like shoot first, ask questions later, a helicopter, and the reviewer remarking, "Oh, the poor unsuspecting fool. Jean-Luc always does the morning school run in style." The next page in the magazine features a preview of Monaco Grand Prix on the Nintendo 64. Blimey, frog race, eh? A bit harsh perhaps. The preview mentions Ubisoft, the chaps behind Rayman 2, Hype the Time Quest, and Tonic Trouble, were trying to polish Monaco Grand Prix, a follow-up to their F1 pole position. The reviewer notes the game looks alright, boasting smooth horizons, which was a dig at the pop-up issues in other racing games at the time. They also mention that you were stuck with made UP teams and drivers, because there wasn't an official FIA license. Not ideal, that Borrella. The preview mentions the frame rate needed some work, and that some tracks ran smoother than others, like Monaco and Australia, but tracks like Brazil and Silverstone suffered. The reviewer hopes it was just an early version issue that would be optimized. Poi Calais. There's also mention of car customization options, Friday and Saturday practice sessions. The interface isn't as slick as World Grand Prix, but the details are there. Overall, the reviewer seems cautiously optimistic, saying the game needed a lot to happen to mix with Paradigm's 93%er, whatever that means. The page also has a screenshot of a pileup on track, which they sarcastically attribute to Stick James getting behind the wheel. There are some screenshots showing the racing and in-game options. Warrant. The next page features a preview of 2 upcoming Nintendo 64 games from Infogrames. First up is Taz Express, a 3D platformer starring the Tasmanian Devil. The reviewer notes the graphics look above average compared to other Mario clones, and the game features other Warner Bros. Characters. Screenshots show Taz running around some pretty basic-looking 3D environments. The game was slated for a September release. Tacker. The other game previewed is Tweety Kart, Looney Tunes Space Race, a multiplayer kart racer. The reviewer pokes fun at the character design in multiplayer races, then acknowledges that if you're not a fan of Mario Kart, this could be a good alternative. The article suggests that Sylvester will fill the Mario role, Tweety will be like Toad, and Taz will be the fat bloke, which sounds about right, and it was planned for a summer release. Screenshots show what appear to be early levels of Bugsy racing at start. The reviewer also notes that hopefully the tracks will be easier to see than the one pictured, and wonders what the battery icon is for, guessing it's some sort of energy meter. The next page is a preview of Shadowgate 64, Trials of the Four Towers on the N64. It was a game I was really looking forward to at the time. It's being developed by Kemco, and looks like a first-person puzzle adventure in the style of Myst, which was popular on the PC. I remember the original Shadowgate on the NES, or SNES as we called it, so I was excited to see a new take on the series. The preview talks about playing as the halfling Dell, exploring Castle Shadowgate, and facing the evil Warlock Lord. Apparently Shadowgate Rising, a sequel, is already in the works, set a few hundred years after the events of Shadowgate 64. The reviewer notes that it is coded by a different team, so who knows how that will turn out. There are also some screenshots of the game, and I can see the graphics and interiors are looking pretty gloomy, as I expected, and Castle Shadowgate itself has seen better days. The reviewer even makes a Turok 2 comparison. The next page of this N64 mag features previews of a few games that were on the horizon back in '99. First up is California Speed, which the reviewer seems to think is just a faster version of Rush 2, with slightly different graphics. They reckon Midway's done a decent job porting it, even though it probably won't have the hires mode that some were hoping for. Loads of cars and tracks apparently, ranging from nippy sports models to pickup trucks, and even a golf cart. Then there's Carmageddon, which they got to have a play with at the office. Sounds like they were impressed with the visuals, especially with the expansion pack boosting the resolution. The reviewer liked how the cars crumpled as they took damage, starting out all shiny and new before getting battered to pieces. The cause of the carnage in the final version will be zombies, which you can splatter across the road. Apparently SCI are including an N64 specific rural England level populated by animals and farmers. There's a little side bit called An Ear to the Ground, which mentions that Fighter's Destiny 2 is in development, Harvest Moon 64 is due for release in Japan, Marigold are working on Kyojin no Doshin, and the productive coders at Iguana US are working on Turok 3. Oblivion, which they believe, or not to be perfectly honest, will be released in September. Also, Cryo are converting their PlayStation Aqua Racer 360 to the N64. The next page is a bit of a nostalgic trip down memory lane, right to the late 90s and a certain N64 magazine. The main article's musing on the state of gaming, with a bit of a wish list for the future, or rather, 1999. There's a call for more engaging crowds in sports games, more interesting and less barren game environments, and the yearning for less realism, which is quite funny considering the push for it at the time. There's even a shout out for more voice recognition, beyond Pikachu of course, and a hope for VR integration. The writer mentions a few games as examples, like Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time for interesting environments, Silicon Valley for innovative unrealism, and NFS3 Hot Pursuit for its exciting chase sequences. There's also Abe's Exodus for the Oddworld speak. There's a section noting how sales of the N64 rose dramatically in Japan following the release of Zelda, and even more so with the VR-compatible Pikachu Genki Dechu pet game. Lastly, there's a short blurb about Konami's Thrill Drive, taking the concept of realism a little too far, with graphic portrayals of human roadkill. How tasteful. The next page is a special investigation into the game Hybrid on the N64, a game that, if I recall, had some promise but didn't quite stick the landing. The page features some artwork of a bloke who looks like he stepped straight out of a comic book, an alien-esque creature, and a couple of screenshots from the game itself. One screen shows what looks like some bloke getting a right kicking, the other, well, it's anyone's guess. They both look as though they're from some kind of action game. The next page is a sneak peek at Konami's new action RPG, Hybrid Heaven, with the bold claim, Metal Gear Solid? Pshaw. It seems the magazine chaps were proper impressed, even getting a sneaky peek at a nearly finished cart from Konami's HQ. Konami apparently were big shots back in the day on the SNES with classics like the original International Superstar Soccer, Contra which was known as Probotector, not forgetting things like Gradius and Parodius, and those other games like Poppin' Twinbee and Sparkster. They had successes on the N64 as well with the 64-bit International Superstar Soccer, Mystical Ninja and Rakuga Kids. The magazine is saying this year could be their best yet, with Hybrid Heaven and Castlevania and maybe even an N64 version of PSX Metal Gear Solid. They reckon it could be one of the games of the year, which sounds like some high praise indeed. The next page, now we're talking, a special investigation into Hybrid Heaven. It goes on about the camera controls, and how you can use the C buttons to get a better view of the action. Got that? Super. Cheeky. Yo. Then there's a breakdown of the opening cutscene, step by step, starting with John Slater watching TV, then someone knocking on the door when he's in the shower, a mysterious phone call, and his girlfriend getting shot in the subway. Grim stuff. Finally, it delves into the combat system, saying it is menu-driven, and how you need to fill your power bar before you can attack, and how you can get an advantage if you attack from the rear, which is always nice apparently. The refresh menu has some health power-ups, and they make a point of guns being rare in the game, and say you'll mostly be wanting attack. Health boost ahoy! The next page is from N64 Magazine, back in March 1999. It's a special investigation on Hybrid Heaven. The article starts with a bit of the story. Slater blows up, his girlfriend is aghast, and Diaz is held by the bodyguards and someone is being taken in a lift to an underground installation, where he breaks free and falls from the lift, which is where the game begins. It states that although the introductory cutscenes have lots of speech, throughout the rest of the game conversations take place in text, but that the English translation is great. There are sections on combat, Pulverize, which allows you to choose between punch and kick, using left or right limbs to hit different areas, and another called Defend, where there are defensive options to step, guard and counter, where if you're lucky, allows you to throw the move back in your opponent's face, or escape, take the fall or try to reverse it. The reviewer talks about earning the right to learn new moves and customize your character's abilities, and how every part of your body has a specific offensive and defensive score, which is a nice touch. You can apparently eventually pull off preset combos or link moves together to create your own. Plum diddly plum. And then some. The next page dives into Hybrid Heaven, a game shrouded in secrecy back in '99. Konami kept this one close to their chest, didn't they? The big news is the reveal of a multiplayer mode, which was a surprise to everyone, apparently. The reviewer seems genuinely chuffed about having the exclusive on this. They're banging on about the character-building combat system being brilliant. There's talk of picking up weapons, but you're already packing an unlimited ammo gun, which is handy for those pesky sentry droids. Apparently you can't shoot people in close combat. The reviewer admits the game's not perfect, a few niggling flaws, but overall they think it's an astonishing surprise. The combat system's described as a turn-based and swiftly smooth affair, which sounds a bit like a contradiction if you ask me. There's mention of cool characters, horrible mutants, and mazy levels. The verdict? Huge, unique, compelling, and rampantly original, which is quite a claim. The reviewer also dives into the storyline, Diaz, John Slater, clones, aliens. Warrington Nor characters, Warrington Nor characters, Warrington Nor characters, Warrington Nor characters. The reviewer mentions one game with a big Z in it, probably referring to Zelda. You know how they went on about the story being compelling and immersive, and the twist upon twist plot really makes for a story so compelling, but that really only happened in one game. There are screenshots showing off the combat, the menus, and the character customization. It's all looking rather futuristic and a bit odd, to be honest. The next page is a special investigation into Hybrid Heaven on the N64. It seems the reviewer is quite impressed with the combat system, describing it as brilliantly refined and is something of an action-adventure RPG, and reckons it could be a contender for the best beat-em-up on the console. There's mention of loading characters, Jack Slater or Diaz, from the main game into a two-player battle mode, and they can also fight as any of the hybrid mutants that have been fought in the game. Orange? The review praises the game's camera, comparing it to Konami's Mystical Ninja starring Goemon, and notes the C-button magic for manipulating the camera. They also point out that the game is post-Zelda in terms of its narrative ambition. The reviewer does have some minor gripes, like the explosions being a bit underwhelming, and the sound effects being a bit weedy. There's also a screenshot showing a clone boss battle, which apparently involves running away rather than fighting. The review talks about the monsters, of which there are plenty, and imagines there to be possibly 30 or even 40, and says most of them are hybrids of the title. This page is a preview of a footy game from way back when. It's titled Michael Society. I reckon it's meant to be read as Michael Soccer, a new footy game that the mag are previewing. The article, part of the magazine's N64 Special Investigation, takes a look at how this new game from Silicon Dreams stacks up against the FIFA and ISS games of the time. It's World League Soccer 98, being renamed for the N64, and judging by what's written here, it seems the reviewer rates it as a good alternative, especially with the Michael Owen endorsement for World League Soccer 99. There's a screenshot showing a match between Man United and Newcastle, with a tagline about how the pitch cam gives you a good view of the detail, but it's not very workable. The next page is an overview of Michael Owen's Soccer 99 for the N64. The title is emblazoned across the top in big, bold lettering. There are a few screenshots showcasing the graphics, which, at the time, weren't half bad, though the reviewer notes there was still work to be done on the player models. It boasts of detailed players and sharp stadia, without needing the expansion pack for highest graphics, although the expansion pack is used for lengthy replays. The reviewer seems quite impressed, mentioning the 3D FX-like world and the individual player characteristics. It's suggested that you'll notice defenders tackle better, wingers are faster, and strikers are better finishers, so the reviewer is claiming this gives the game a realistic feel, which, looking back, is a bit generous, innit? The box out details suggest a May 99 release in the UK, and a Summer 99 release in the US, so it was pretty current at the time of publication, which was March 1999. The next page is a preview of Michael Owen's Soccer 99 on the N64, or MOS 99 as they're calling it. It seems they're pretty chuffed with the game, reckon it's going to give IS 98 a run for its money. They're going on about the skill moves, loads of combos to master, and the control system sounds pretty deep, with the extend button on the right shoulder adding some flair. There's a bit about the free kicks, how you can bend it like Beckham, which was all the rage at the time. There's a special interrogation feature with Rob Palfreman, the producer. He's going on about how the playability is top-notch and the graphics are nice and sharp, even without the expansion pack. He seems quite confident that MOS 99 will stand out from the crowd, reckons it's more of a player than a looker, that this version looks incredible. Some of the teams will have fictional names apparently, to avoid any legal bother, and no mention of who's doing the commentary. The next page has a feature on Michael Owen's Soccer 99 for the N64. The reviewer seems pretty chuffed with the game, reckons the controls and overall design are spot on. It touches upon the through ball being a key component, and finishing styles. There's also a bit about the commentary team, Peter Brackley and Ray Wilkins, who apparently did the PlayStation version as well, and they reckon they did a bang-up job on the game. There's talk about new features for the N64 version, and AI improvements over previous versions of World League Soccer 99. They're even saying the analog pad really helps the gameplay. Someone asked about a transfer system like in FIFA, but they went for a more arcadey feel, which was probably a decent call. The reviewer chats about meeting Michael Owen himself, saying he was a nice bloke and professional during the motion capture stuff. It also contains screenshots of the game in action, showing off the graphics and some of the players. Warrington Null. The next page is the first issue of Planet Game Boy, from March 1999. It's a trip down memory lane, alright. The contents page has Pikachu on it, and covers a history of the Game Boy, naturally, with all three models shown. There's a section dedicated to Pokemon, which was just exploding at the time, and a classic corner and tips and scores section, and even one for the pocket camera. Previews are on page 40 yaddy. The review section includes Zelda DX, Tetris DX, and the Smurfs Nightmare, which I don't remember being a classic. There's also Clustar, Mortal Kombat 4, Rugrats, Rampage World Tour, Sylvester and Tweety, Game & Watch Gallery 2, and Oddworld Adventures. Quite a mixed bag, really. Check. The editor, Tim Weaver, talks about the Game Boy Color and its magical powers, like needing only 2 AA batteries. He also mentions thrashing Martin at Pokémon. Sounds like a typical day at the office. The magazine is promoting the Game Boy as a companion to the N64, the two being interchangeable and a great way to play games. And if you're feeling creative, they're running a competition to win a Game Boy Color if you send in your mutilated Game Boy camera mugshot. Charming. This page in Planet Game Boy Issue 1 dives into why the original Game Boy and Game Boy Pocket were such massive successes. It's all about nostalgia, in it. Major. The article points out, the original Game Boy, launched in '89, was the proper first handheld console. The screen was a bit blurry, and it munched through AA batteries like nobody's business, but the sheer amount of add-ons you could get for it was amazing, turning it into a retro enthusiast's dream. They even mention a Man Utd edition, which I can't imagine would be that popular down south. They reckon the fat Game Boy was comfy for those with big hands, despite the screen blur. Then they move on to the Game Boy Pocket, which came out in '95. A much better design, smaller, and ran on AAA batteries, but more importantly the screen was black and white instead of green and grey, which made games like Mario Land much better. The reviewer reckons the Chrome model was the sexiest console ever designed. Strong words. The article finishes by saying even with the Game Boy Color just around the corner, Nintendo weren't going to abandon the Pocket, and you could pick up a Chrome one on the cheap, which seemed to be true. The next page looks back at the Game Boy phenomenon. It talks about how the arrival of color handhelds was seen as the next big thing, and how companies like Sega and Atari thought it would be enough to dethrone the Game Boy. Remember the Game Gear? Faster processor, backlit color screen. Warrington Acer. Seemed good at the time, but it didn't last. And the Atari Lynx, a proper 16-bit color machine, designed by the Amiga folks, but nobody really cared. The article mentions the Game Boy Color finally arriving, and how Nintendo managed to crack the battery life issue with a non-backlit screen. It could run for over 20 hours on just 2 AA batteries. The original Metroid 2 gets a color upgrade on the Game Boy Color, and if you've played the fantastic SNES version, this is a great way to while away a few hours. There's a section called Failed Contenders to the Game Boy's Throne, looking at other handhelds that tried and failed. The Game Gear, the Atari Lynx, the PC Engine GT, a portable version of its console brother, the Game.com, remember that? A weird mix of games console and personal assistant, the Neo Geo Pocket, and the WonderSwan. All tried, all failed, mostly due to poor battery life or lack of support. The Game Boy Color still works with the old Game Boy camera and printer, but you can't take color pictures unfortunately. Misha. This page is from the old N64 Planet Game Boy Magazine, Issue 1. It's got a preview of some games coming to the handheld, including Conker's Pocket Tales, which is a rare title, so that's a good thing, although the reviewer says it looks Zelda-esque. It's about Conker trying to find buried Choris. Then there's Men in Black based on the film, and it features digital versions of Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones, and Linda Fiorentino. Looks like a platform shoot-'em-up. The reviewer says it'll have plenty of locations, like jungles and sewers. Finally there's Gex. Enter the Gecko. I remember that being awful on the N64, so hopefully, this Game Boy version is better. It's a top-down scrolling game, and the reviewer says the graphics are better than the N64 version, and thank heavens for that. BB. This page from N64 Planet Magazine features reviews for The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening DX, and Tetris DX on the Game Boy. Link's Awakening DX gets a glowing review, earning a 5-star rating. They reckon it's a must-have. The reviewer notes the colorful update to the classic Game Boy title, complete with a new dungeon and the addition of a camera feature. Apparently, the Cuckoos are as deadly in the GB version as they are in the N64 version. Tetris DX also receives a 5-star rating. They say that the DX version adds new features like Ultra Mode, 40 Lines Mode, and a Versus Mode, all while keeping the classic gameplay intact. They also mention the chrome effect and the backgrounds. They like it, and tell the reader to buy it. The next page features a couple of Game Boy game reviews, starting with The Smurfs Nightmare. It seems like the reviewer at N64 Planet, or Game Boy Planet as it was known at the time, wasn't blown away, but thought it was a cute platformer with decent graphics. They compare it to a 16-bit Mickey Mouse game rather than a Mario clone, which, fair enough, it does look a bit slower paced. Apparently, Gargamel's been up to no good, trapping Smurfs in nightmares. You're the only awake Smurf, so it's up to you to rescue your mates. Sounds like standard platforming fare, really, entering houses and collecting items. The reviewer noted that the SNES-like graphics look smooth and colorful, even though it's a monochrome Game Boy game. They also liked the mole bits. It got a 4 out of 5. Then there's Cluster, which they describe as a 360-degree Tetris-alike. Tetris clones were everywhere back then, weren't they? This one sounds a bit different though, with shapes floating in from all sides, and a dot in the middle you have to catch them with. Rotate the whole thing to make everything fit. It was given a 3 out of 5, with the reviewer noting it was better than the average Tetris clone, but the graphics have very little detail. The next page from the magazine features a couple of Game Boy titles. First up is Mortal Kombat 4, remember that? A bit of a squeeze on the old Game Boy with only 2 buttons, but they somehow managed to get a Killer Instinct type game on the handheld, so why not give it a go? The reviewer seems a bit underwhelmed, moaning about muffled speech and fuzzy fatality boxes, and it being sluggish though, so maybe not one to rush out for. The review mentions Fujin, who didn't appear in the N64 version, so that is interesting. It is mentioned that they have a few of your favorite characters on the N64 version, but you can hardly tell who is who. We get a screenshot of Raiden taking a beating from Reiko. Ouch! Chugurus. Then there's Rugrats, based on the film. A cheerful-looking platform game timed with the film release. The reviewer seems to think it is a bit basic but fun, despite slightly dodgy scrolling at times. It has been given a 4/5 rating. They reckon they will be selling this one at the cinema. Yeah. This page features 2 Game Boy game reviews, presented in that classic magazine style we used to lap up back in the day. Boryu. First up is Rampage World Tour. I remember the arcade game, and the various home versions vaguely. Wasn't really my cup of tea. The reviewer here doesn't seem too impressed either, giving it a measly 1 star. They reckon it's lost its multiplayer appeal, and that all the levels look the same. Ouch. Plus, no save feature, just passwords. How archaic. They even joke about how much the game costs. Then there's Sylvester and Tweety, a game attempting those isometric 3D graphics that were all the rage after Alien 8 and Batman on ye olde Spectrum. The reviewer seems a little more forgiving here, awarding it 3 stars, noting that the controls take some getting used to, and that it would have been great to see conversions of Head Over Heels or Nightshade instead. I remember those 2 games, quite innovative for their time. This page in N64 Magazine features a look at a couple of Game Boy titles. First up is Game & Watch Gallery 2. For £20 you get 5 complete Game & Watch games including Parachute, Chef, Helmet Vermin and Donkey Kong. You could play them in updated graphics or the basic classic versions. The reviewer mentions 3 additional gallery slots you can unlock by getting high scores. They also noted that if you had the Super Game Boy 2 adapter for the SNES, you got some superb backgrounds based on the original Game & Watch cases. Then there's Oddworld Adventures, which also cost £20. The reviewer notes that while the Oddworld games on the PlayStation had great graphics and cutscenes, the Game Boy version exposes some shortcomings in the gameplay. The reviewer was not too impressed and comments on the controls and how they can be frustrating. They mention rescuing aliens from jailers who want to turn them into fast food, and instead of weapons, you have to use burps, whistles and farts to persuade the guards. The reviewer suggests it's one for Oddworld lovers only. This page is a look at the phenomenon that was Pokémon back in the day. It's from a time when we were all trying to figure out what the fuss was about this new craze from Japan. The article, titled, "Everything You Wanted to Know About Pokémon," attempts to explain the appeal of Pocket Monsters as it was originally known. It jokes that Pokémon is as popular outside Japan as it is known in Japan, which exploded onto the scene as an early Game Boy RPG. It notes the staggering sales figures, over 11 million copies worldwide at the time, and mentions the growing empire of merchandise, including trading cards and a cartoon series. The piece also touches on the potential for Pokémon overload, imagining Pokémon-themed airliners and VW Beetles. It sarcastically suggests renaming Topeka, Kansas, to Topekachu, and muses about Pikachu running for president. Cute as a button, asexual and a non-smoker, so it jokes. It then gives some advice on importing the game, noting that Game Boy cartridges are universally compatible, so you can play the Japanese version, but advises against it if you don't speak the language. It recommends waiting for the US version, but laments the long wait and the delay for a UK release. The article closes with a suggestion that the UK version will be an enhanced color update of the red and blue versions, and teases the existence of a Japan-only 151st monster. The page features box art from red version and blue version with a picture of Pikachu and Charmander. The next page delves right into the Pokémon Game Boy universe. It talks about the original game, a battle-heavy RPG where you collect and train 150 monsters. The aim is to become a master trainer, collect badges, and fill up your Pokédex. They mention the different versions available at the time: Red, Blue, and the special edition, Pocket Monsters Pikachu. They also touch on the link-up cable for trading Pokémon, a clever way to encourage social play. The page also brings up Epikachu, referring to the cartoon series that caused a bit of a stir with its flashing lights triggering seizures, but reassuringly, the offending scenes were reworked. Then there's a section titled 64-bit Pokémon, discussing Nintendo's attempts to boost sales of the Nintendo 64 with Pokémon-related titles. It mentions Pocket Monsters Stadium, and Pikachu Genki Dechu, which had already topped the charts, and Pocket Monsters Snap, which was slated for release on the 64DD. It also notes rumors of a full Nintendo 64 version of the Game Boy game, tentatively called Pocket Monsters 64, or Pocket Monsters RPG. There are smaller segments focusing on each of these Nintendo 64 titles. Pocket Monsters Stadium got a decent review score. The feature talks about downloading your Game Boy caught monsters and pitting them against each other in 3D battles. Pikachu Genki Dechu, an interactive voice-controlled virtual pet game, is also featured where you befriend Pikachu. Lastly, Pocket Monsters Snap appears, a game where you take photos of rare monsters. Gershu. There is an image of Ash Ketchum from the TV series and a Pocket Pikachu. It also talks about the Pocket Pikachu virtual pet, as well as a description of Pocketachu, the Pikachu-style Tamagotchi. This page takes us back to the Game Boy days with a look at Super Mario Land 2-6 Golden Coins. Warrington Norsa. The review was spot on. It really did feel like a portable version of Mario World on the SNES, and for 25 quid it was a steal back then, even without color, as noted in the article. They're even begging Nintendo to make a color update, which I'm sure Nintendo would have heard. Hey, eventually. Hey, there's also a section called Tell It Like It Is, pondering what Game Boy Color games we'd like to see, and they're asking for our input. A new Mario adventure, or even something based on an N64 game, they say. Wishful thinking, perhaps. They want to hear our outlandish ideas for the next gen of Game Boy software. Few high scores are listed, from Tetris and Tetris DX, to Pokemon and Donkey Kong in Game & Watch Gallery 2. Also, there's a cheat code for Buster Move 2, Arcade Edition, and a Yoshi's Cookie level skip trick too. Good times. This page from N64 Planet brings back some memories. It's a guide section for Game Boy games, a handy thing back in the day when the internet wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. First up, we have Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, which was a fantastic game, a real classic. There's a few tips there, like a way to change the music and a trick to get past solid objects, and some arrows. Then there's Kirby's Pinball Land, which was a decent pinball game, nothing too special. They've included tips on how to skip to the bonus stages and bosses if you are really stuck. Wario Blast gets a mention with some passwords to unlock powered-up characters and special battle modes. I remember getting the chance to have a special battle mode with Wario. Final Fantasy Legend 2, or Final Fantasy Xi Legend 2, has a sound test feature you could unlock, which was really interesting, and how to access extra sounds by using a save file that has your party above level 57. There is even Tetris Blast with an extra game mode, where you can access Fight 2 mode if you put in a certain button combination at the title screen. Lastly, there are tips for the Super Mario Land games, including a master cheat for Super Mario Land 3 which lets you alter your lives and even your hat, and the stage select and expert level modes in the first Super Mario Land. You can also play the demo of Super Mario Land 2 by holding some buttons when the title screen appears. This page, blimey, takes me back. It's all about the Game Boy camera and printer. I recall it was a bit of a novelty at the time, but it had a certain charm about it. The page features a Game Boy gallery, where people could submit their artistic or freaky photos taken with the camera for a chance to win a Game Boy Color, which would have been all the rage back then. The article highlights how the Game Boy camera and printer combo allowed you to deface textbooks without the risk of detention, a rather puerile but fun concept, I must admit. The piece also mentions that it was a productive afternoon playing with the Game Boy camera, looking for unusual shots, and adjusting the brightness controls. There are various black and white photos that people have taken and printed with the device. The next page, oh blimey, it's a right laugh in it. It's an advert for a multiplayer competition in N64 Magazine, back when we all used to gather round the telly for a good old gaming session. The characters from Mario Kart 64 are plastered all over the page, and they are talking about office games of Turok 2 and GoldenEye, typical bloke stuff, headshots and whatnot. They are offering readers the chance to play the N64 Magazine team at their own game, for a huge engraved trophy and bragging rights. It's all a bit of fun really. Remember when multiplayer was just fun with your mates? Troitra. Games back then, simpler times. GoldenEye was of course amazing on the N64, Turok 2 was alright for what it was, lots of blood and gore, and Mario Kart 64 was legendary. Me and my mates would spend hours racing each other around those tracks, good times. The next page of N64 Magazine, it's all about challenges for the readers. Multiplayer extravaganza, it says. The blurb explains that only 20 lucky people will get a chance to thrash them. Ooh! There's a Turok 2 Challenger speedrun of the Death Marshes level. The suggested time to beat is 40 minutes, and the lads are even letting you use cheats. Bit generous, really. They mention the level is relatively free of the toing and froing that you get with Lair of the Blind Ones. Still sprawling though, and you'll have to face hordes of the hulking Perlin. They suggest using invincibility. I remember the Death Marshes being pretty sprawling back in the day on the old N64. And there's also a Mario Kart 64 challenge. It's all about the best time on Bowser's Castle. 2 minutes 28 seconds is the suggested time. They called it the trickiest of the evergreen Mario Kart tracks. There are a couple of tips for it, including secret corner turbos, best place to use mushrooms, and how to deal with the thwomps. For the expert though, it's the perfect track to prove your worth, and the racing course of the true Mario Kart connoisseur, they say, may be a bit much. Finally, they want photos of the stat screen as proof. This page is from one of the N64 Magazine issues that featured a great multiplayer extravaganza. It looks like they're setting up challenges for readers to participate in, with the chance to win a spot in a grand final. Joriachu. There are 2 games featured here. First, we have GoldenEye 007. The challenge is all about accuracy on the Bunker 2 level on Secret Agent difficulty. You've got to waste at least 60 guards, while using all the weapons and infinite ammo. The target to beat is 250% accuracy, which is quite a feat, to be honest. They even suggest using the shotgun or magnum to cheese the score, and using security cameras to herd guards into one place. Next is F0X. The challenge for this game is to set the best time on the Devil's Forest 2 track. They're looking for a time under 1 minute, 40 seconds. This track has that rippled section that sends you flying if you're not careful, but you need the boost. The magazine also lists general rules. For example, all entries need to reach them by June 1, 1999, and entries will need video or photographic proof. The top 5 winners from each challenge will get to battle it out in the grand final. Looks like they're going to be filming somewhere in June, and the details of the final will appear in a later issue. And yes, they couldn't resist a dig at Tim Weaver, saying he stinks. The next page of N64 Arena features FIFA 99, with the bold claim that it's the best FIFA game so far, but the reviewer wonders if it can outdo International Superstar Soccer 98. Ooh, fighting talk indeed. Fugru. There's a guide to scoring section, explaining how N64 Arena awards its star game medals. They don't just slap a medal on any old game, they play right through to the end to make sure you're getting your money's worth. A yellow 85% and above means it's a star game badge winner, while blue 84%, 70% means it's a top-notch game that's been eclipsed on the N64. Green 69%, 50% means it's perfectly playable, but maybe not all that special. Red 49%, 20% is for games that are lazily programmed, and grey 19%, 0% is the disaster zone. Ouch. This page from N64 Magazine features an import arena showcasing games popular in America and Japan. There is All-Star Tennis, Chameleon Twist 2, Milo's Astro Lanes, Virtual Pool, Battletang Axe, Smash Bros, Castlevania, Doraemon 2, Golden Nugget, Magical Tetris, Fox Hoops, Tetris 64, Gomon 2, Get a Love, Snowspeeder and Bio Tetris and River King. Suri. The magazine also delves into how they review games, breaking down the categories into visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict. Those were the days, eh? There's also a section dedicated to Team 64, the magazine's reviewers, and each one gives their thoughts on the game of the month they reviewed. James Ashton, a chap with an odd sense of humor, picks Tetris DX. Will Overton, with his trademark hair, picks Castlevania. Tim Weaver likes to make mention of Michael Owen and his personal song. Martin Kitts has played too much Game Boy, so he likes Zelda DX. Justin Webb is more into Depeche Mode than Personal Jesus, and he's chosen Snowspeeder as his game of the month. Ashawal. Paul Edwards is in the doghouse with Chameleon Twist 2. Andrea Ball, bless her heart, has Battletanks as her game of the month. Jess Bickham takes a break from touring to give us his thoughts on Smash Bros. Mark Green accidentally swallowed Big Ben and Virtual Pool. James Price and Milo's Astro Lanes. The next page features FIFA 99 on the N64. It starts off with a look back at FIFA on the N64, and, oof, what a state it was. They reckon it's been a criminally long 10 months since the last FIFA game. The reviewer wonders about improvements like perfectly animated players, a control system that responds instantly, and a pitch without glue. They ask if players will look less like relatives of the Elephant Man. Apparently not. They admit it's still not as good as IS-98, but crucially, it's getting there, and is better than ever before. The game has 5 great things that make it worthwhile. The licensing is covered until the year 3672, giving players hundreds of European and world teams. There are a couple of screenshots of gameplay, and a box with details like it being 96 megabytes, and needing 6 pages on a controller pack, also the price of £40. The next page features a review of FIFA 99 on the N64. FIFA 99, back when football games were just starting to find their feet in 3D. Warrant. The reviewer seems fairly impressed, noting improvements in commentary. John Motson apparently sounded less like he was commentating from the bottom of a well this time around. They also mention the abundance of moves, and the diverse animation, even if the players still looked a bit like they were skating on ice. There's a section dedicated to the options available in the game, with the reviewer highlighting the player edit and team edit modes, as well as the transfer list. Remember when a transfer list was considered a vital inclusion? Simpler times, eh? A couple of screenshots show some in-game action, with a German Bundesliga match and the Brazilian team celebrating a goal, and they note, "Follow my lead, aga-do-do-do, push pineapple, shake a tree." They poke a bit of fun at the game's flashy presentation, referring to the cardboard cutout of Dennis Bergkamp in your local electronics boutique, staring at you with Medusa-like eyes. They also mention some of the music featured such as Blur, Chumbawamba, and Fatboy Slim. Danger. The next page in the magazine talks about the competitions you could dive into on FIFA 99 for the N64. The reviewer mentions the Simple Cup Winners' Cup, the UEFA Cup, and the Solid Champions League, where Man United are holding it down for the British sides, while Arsenal inevitably crash out. They are being a bit cheeky, suggesting that domestically there wasn't much to get excited about, with no FA Cup or League Cup in the game, commenting that these were cunningly being held back for EA's Premier League game later on. There were 12 leagues to choose from, including the English Premier League, the German Bundesliga, Italian Serie A, and the French Division du Saucisson, along with leagues from Belgium, Brazil, Netherlands, Portugal, Scotland, Spain, Sweden, and the USA. If those didn't float your boat, there was the European Dream League with 20 teams, a bit like the Champions League but with 38 tough matches. The page touches on creating your own custom cups and leagues with up to 32 teams of clubs or international sides, either in league or knockout formats. You could also tinker with the number of times you played each team and when the season started, which was handy for smaller premierships. Lastly, friendly matches got a mention, where you could just pick the teams and get straight into it, or use the quick start option to have the CPU pick for you. The golden goal mode, where the next goal wins, was a bit random but depended on how well you could speed up and run diagonally into the box. They end it with another cheeky comment, saying this option was best if you and your mate were both a bit rubbish. This page is all about managing your team in FIFA 99 on the N64, back in the day when that console was still cutting edge. It talks about the starting lineup, letting you decide who gets the nod and who warms the bench. There's the IGM strategy bit, where you could tweak formations like 442 or 541, and mess about with player positions to get your tactics spot on, although it was never quite the same as real-life managing, was it? Actor. Then there's the kick takers, where you get to pick who steps up for corners and free kicks, crucial stuff when you're trying to win that cup final. The transfers section lets you buy and sell players, and apparently you could snag some big names like Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Shearer, Beckham, Salas, Del Piero and Bergkamp without breaking the bank, which sounds a bit far-fetched even for a video game. The Brazil cut section talks about cut scenes and player celebrations, including a memorable one where a player does cartwheels and gets mobbed by his team. The extra section covers player edits, where you can change shirt numbers, add goatees or mullets, and mess with their stats. It sounds like you could create some real oddballs. Team Edit lets you create your own team, design kits, and pick a stadium. Those were the days of endless tweaking and tinkering. The next page is a bit of a rant about FIFA 99 on the N64. Remember FIFA 99? It was alright, but it wasn't exactly International Superstar Soccer on the SNES, or IS-98 on the PlayStation, was it? The magazine lists 5 rubbish things in FIFA 99, and they aren't wrong. Manual player selection was a pain, wasn't it? And the control delay, you'd press pass, and your player would take an age to respond. The speed up was a bit overpowered, mind. Easy goals galore with that. No. The reviewer mentions the game looking better than it plays, which was a common complaint back then. They're right, the N64 FIFA games always seemed a bit clunkier than their PlayStation counterparts. Still, FIFA 99 wasn't all bad. It was a decent enough footy game for its time, and it was one of the big selling points for the N64, even if Konami were better. The next page features a review of FIFA 99 on the N64. Looking back, it's got that classic blocky N64 look to it. The reviewer reckons it's a solid football game, but it's still miles behind IS-98, which, let's be honest, most football games were back then. There are a few screenshots, one showing some kind of goal celebration with the name K Gallica attached to it, and the review touches on the gameplay, saying it feels a bit sticky at times. They also take the mickey out of the replay system, saying it only lets you view goals from one angle. Typical. Wow. The reviewer also mentions that the fouling is strangely satisfying due to the referee AI. In the verdict, they give FIFA 99 an 83%, stating that whilst it's the best FIFA yet, IS-98 still reigns supreme. This page takes a look at All-Star Tennis 99 inches on the N64. It's a bit of a mixed bag apparently. The reviewer wasn't entirely convinced, stating it couldn't make up its mind if it wanted to be a proper simulation or an arcadey game. The screenshots show the game in action, with a rather unflattering overhead camera view. It seems they had some issues with the camera angles, not being able to see if a ball was in or out, which would be a bit of a pain. The reviewer also mentions special moves, like a racket breaker and a roundhouse kick, which sound a bit bonkers for a tennis game. There is a review box, stating it came out in March, used 64 megs of memory, and supported 1 to 4 players. The next page features All-Star Tennis 99 for the N64, and it seems the reviewer isn't exactly blown away. The headline, "What a Bomber," kind of sets the tone. They're not impressed with the bomb tennis mode, which sounds like a bit of a gimmick where the ball leaves behind landmines. They reckon it makes an already frustrating game even more annoying, something that you come to associate with All-Star Tennis. There's a suggestion that machine gun tennis might have been a better idea, some sarcasm there then. The reviewer questions whether it's an average tennis game, criticizing the strange special moves involving teleporting balls and flaming shots. It seems the reviewer isn't happy with the game speed either, saying that the players move quickly but are slow swinging their rackets. There is an image of Venus Williams, who they say has a lookalike in the game. Finally, there is a court-out section, mentioning 8 different courts available, from the zippy, zingy grass of Britain to the slower European clay courts and artificial hard courts. The next page features a review of All-Star Tennis on the N64. The reviewer, Martin Kitts, seems a bit underwhelmed, giving it a score of 68%. The review highlights some of the game's shortcomings, like the somewhat unresponsive controls and AI quirks, but acknowledges it can be fun with a mate, especially the rallies. There's a section called Packed with Character, which lists the tennis players in the game. It mentions Mark Philippoussi, Gustavo Kuerten, Richard Krejcik, Conchita Martinez, Michael Chang, Amanda Coetzer, Jana Novotná, and Jonas Bjorkman. Looking back, I'd say these were decent choices, but not exactly the most exciting bunch, now were they? They reckon Ubisoft should have gone for the rights to someone like John McEnroe or Jimmy Connors instead for a bit more personality, which I can totally agree with. The screenshots show the in-game graphics, which, to be honest, look fairly standard for the time, along with some menu screens where you can select your player and choose a tournament. The graphics were never amazing on the N64, were they? Ray Gengra. They make a comment about tournaments having to be male and female mixed, which is accurate. Ray Gengra. Other points mentioned are the visuals, sounds, how easy it is to master, and the lifespan of the game. They seem okay with the sounds and lifespan, but less impressed with the visuals and how easy it is to master. The next page features a review of Chameleon Twist 2 for the N64. I remember the first Chameleon Twist being a bit of a Marmite game. Some liked it, some didn't. This review seems to lean towards the latter, giving it a rather mediocre 55%. The reviewer, Mark Green, reckons it's too similar to the original, with a camera system that's still a nightmare. He mentions the levels are sparse and monotonous, even though they've tried to make them more visually appealing. Sounds like they tried to fix some of the issues from the first game but maybe didn't quite get there. There are a few screenshots showing off the game's colourful but simple graphics, including one with a giant ice lolly, a chameleon doing hockey, and a surreal moment with a floating rabbit. The review box mentions it's an Infogrames title, out now, and will set you back 40 quid. Ouch. It also needs a controller pack to save your progress, which was always a pain back then. There are mentions of platforming fun, difficult navigation, and tedious puzzles. Sounds like a mixed bag. Dikayi. The review also mentions you can use your tongue to latch onto walls and pull yourself over gaps, which was a key feature of the series. They mention Yoshi's story-style greatness, which is something it strives for but does not achieve. The opening blurb talks about how the first level seems designed to showcase the game's deficiencies, especially with the camera issues making it hard to tell where you're going. Sounds like a frustrating experience. The next page features a review of Milo's Astro Lanes for the Nintendo 64, and it's safe to say the reviewer, Tim Weaver, wasn't impressed, calling it stunningly dull and welcoming us to Yawnsville. We also get the feeling that N64 Magazine thought it might have been alright in N64 issue 25, but alas, they were wrong. The review highlights the game's crazy golf-style courses, wacky characters, and power-ups, but ultimately concludes that the core idea just wasn't very good. I remember the idea of a bowling game being a bit naff, even back then, and it looks like this one didn't change my mind. There are screenshots of the gameplay with characters like Anuki and Milo, and some of the special ball moves, which look a bit bonkers. It's also noted that the sampled speech is barely audible, adding to the game's overall lack of appeal. The review ends with a score of 38%, and a warning to watch out for Crave's next game, Eric Bristow's Underwater Darts, which sounds interesting to say the least. The review rates the game's visuals, sounds, mastery, and lifespan. It's safe to say none of these are particularly high, but the reviewer does give the visuals a mildly acceptable marriage of poorly done characters and bowling alleys. The next page features a review of Virtual Pool 64, a game I vaguely remember trying to get into back in the day. It was alright, I suppose, but not exactly a system pusher for the N64. Hahaha. The reviewer, Mark Green, seems fairly impressed with the visuals, especially the balls themselves, reckons they're top-notch. Sounds a bit enthusiastic for a pool game, doesn't it? He also makes note of the ball physics, reckons they'd put Newton to shame. Bit of an overstatement, perhaps. He does have a few gripes though, mainly about the camera going mental when you take a shot. That rings a bell actually. And he reckons pool sims in general are a bit lonely, especially if you can't be bothered to pop down the pub for the real thing. Overall he gives it a 77%, which seems fair enough. It's a decent pool game apparently, but nothing to write home about. The game's trick mode allows literally hours of fun, well 1 hour, or so, according to the caption text. There are plenty of camera angles and realistic ball physics to be found in the game, and according to the review, the game gives you all the possible shot angles. The magazine did preview the game in issue 22, and the text mentions that you might think John Virgo knows all there is to know about trick shots, but spend a while with Virtual Pool's extensive trick shot library, and you could be Jim Davidson's next comedy foil. The balls, according to the article, are free. This page from N64 Arena focuses on Battletanx. The review kicks off with a bit of a dig, highlighting the, shall we say, unique story and art style, but admits it has a certain something that makes it strangely addictive. They don't hold back on the visuals, claiming it looks like an Amiga game, and the music apparently stinks. The gameplay is straightforward. Drive around, blow things up, pick up power-ups like guided missiles and lasers. There are enemies of various colors, and the environment is destructible to a large extent. The reviewer thought the single-player game was a bit simple, but the multiplayer is where it's at, with deathmatch and a twist where you can control your base turret. A nuke is available for complete destruction, and the price of £40 seems a bit steep. The magazine gave it 74%, concluding it's not outstanding, but an amusing and straightforward game of wanton destruction. There are screenshots showing tanks blasting each other in what looks like a post-apocalyptic urban setting. There's a close-up of a rather unattractive girl and the words, "She probably wants to go, mate. Dumbass," which is a bit dodgy, even for the time. The page also features small side comments, such as, 3 tanks remaining, eh? Not too far to go now. Get pressing Xi. And, friendly fire means you've opened fire on your own base. There's also a comment about tank crushage being breathtakingly poor. It mentions that the game has visuals that are all a bit Amiga, and sounds that are simply oof. The next page in the magazine has a preview of Super Smash Bros. For the N64, which was quite the novelty back then. It had just been released in Japan. The reviewer ponders whether it can deliver a good combo system, and if Nintendo characters work in a beat-em-up. There's a mention of how Kirby is. The page also features screenshots of the game, including one with Pikachu observing the melee, and various illustrations of characters like Mario, Fox, Link, and Kirby. They wonder if it can compete with the likes of Tekken and Virtua Fighter, or Fighter's Destiny, on the N64. There's also a little blurb about the magazine bringing reviews of games released in Japan and America, since N64 Magazine is supposedly independent from Nintendo. There's a small table with the release info that shows it's out in Japan. The price is listed as 6,800 yen, which was about £35 at the time. The next page has a review of Super Smash Bros. From back in March 1999 on the N64, which was quite the game at the time, wasn't it? The reviewer seems quite impressed, calling it an incredible beat-em-up with Yoshi in it. They praise the game's unique approach to fighting, focusing on knocking opponents off the stage, rather than just depleting health bars. The old beat-em-ups with health bars were getting stale back then, a bit samey. The single-player game is lauded for its inventiveness, featuring team fights and battles against multiple enemies, such as Yoshi Team and Kirby Team. I remember those being pretty hectic. There are screenshots showcasing Captain Falcon, Link, Kirby, and Yoshi, and they mention the Hyrule Castle and SNES. Super Mario World level designs. The Super Mario World design was secret, but it wasn't that secret really. The levels were great, for the most part. The reviewer also notes the importance of the percentage mark, indicating how much damage a character has taken, and how it affects their vulnerability to being knocked off the stage. It mentions practice mode for combo practice, and that the character select screen lets you choose between very hard, stock mode, and that there are plenty of ways to play the game. Also, there is a Visa start option, and the option for time team rule. Gah! This page, blimey, takes me back. It's a feature on Super Smash Bros. For the N64, highlighting the original 8 fighters in the game. Lolcat. The article kicks off with a bit of a nostalgic intro about the cast, mentioning that some thought we'd never see them in 64 bits. It then dives into Link, calling him a splendid choice. His moves, Magic Sword Swipe and Hookshot, are mentioned, with a little joke about the hookshot being like Scorpion Spear thing from Mortal Kombat. Next up is Samus Aran, stating she's not been seen since Super Metroid on the SNES. The reviewer jokes about hoping her appearance here would spur someone on to do a Metroid update. It then mentions her Blaster Charge and Laser Grapple moves. Then there's Mario, with his Whirlwind Punch and Mega Punch moves, followed by Donkey Kong, making an appearance ahead of his rare blockbuster, presumably Donkey Kong 64. His Spin Attack and Big Punch are highlighted. Finally, there's a section about power-ups that appear randomly during matches, like the Beam Sword, Hammer, Heart Container and Red Shell. Good times, good times. The next page features a spotlight on Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64. The article dives into some of the characters and their moves, offering tips on how to get the most out of each fighter. We've got Yoshi, who, let's be honest, was always a frustrating character to face with his aglaying antics. There's Kirby, the pink blob, with the power to steal abilities. A bit of a dark horse, really. Fox McCloud gets a look in, highlighting his laser pistol and tricky moves, and then Pikachu rounds out the bunch with his electric attacks. The page also mentions GoldenEye, in relation to the motion sensor bomb item in the game, as well as items such as the Fire Flower and Poke Ball. There's a pause for thought section too, which discusses pausing the game to admire special effects and camera angles. It's a bit of fluff, but I suppose it was a novelty at the time. Gyara. It's all pretty standard stuff really, but brings back memories of button bashing sessions with mates. The next page, eh? Right, well this is a bit of a look at Super Smash Bros. On the N64. It's a multiplayer brawler, the sort of thing that was great for a laugh with mates back in the day. The feature talks about team battles, how you can pulverize your mates without worrying about friendly fire. Oh, the carnage! They're teasing the existence of secret characters, saying there are 4, but 2 of them are proper hard to unlock. One wears green, and the other is so obscure, even the reviewer was surprised they made the cut. Wears a baseball cap apparently. They focus on a couple of these hidden characters. First up is Captain Falcon from F-Zero X, the SNES game, who you can get by finishing the single player on any difficulty. They go through his moves, like the Falcon Punch. Giscool. Then there's Purin, or Jigglypuff as the Americans call it, who's another secret character you unlock in the same way. Bit like Kirby apparently, just more squashy. They mention Purin's moves too, like Sing and Sleep. I remember now when I got this in the mag back in '99, the reviewer seemed perplexed why they even had the sleep move in the game. There's a bit about characters you fight in single player but can't normally play as. Luigi, as you'd expect, is similar to Mario but jumps higher. Then there's Terminator Mario, a metal version from Super Mario 64, hard to throw but can't jump. Key. Finally, they talk about the Dummy Horde, a challenge before you fight Whitehand, with loads of metallic pink clones. And Whitehand is the final boss. Contrary to popular belief, apparently, it's not Glover. You have to whittle down his 300 hit points. Teeth gnashingly difficult on harder settings, the magazine says. Simpler times. The next page features a review of Super Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64. The reviewer is clearly impressed, calling it absolutely fantastic and praising its balance, addictive gameplay, and sheer fun factor. They comment on how it brings together characters from various Nintendo franchises, creating a celebration of all things Nintendo. The review mentions the fighting system being more inventive than other beat-em-ups, focusing on knocking opponents out of the arena. A small section is dedicated to how the game is great for multiplayer, with up to 4 players able to battle it out simultaneously. The lack of a 3D sidestep move isn't missed, as it would overcomplicate the action. The camera can scale out a bit too far when players are separated, making the characters appear small. There is mention of players settling on favorite characters, like Link, Kirby, Samus, and Yoshi. There are a few screenshots showcasing gameplay, including a battle on what looks like a floating stage, with Pikachu flying into the air. It's a reference to the classic level designs, and the quirky, unexpected moments that often happen in the game. Accessibility is praised, with the only Japanese text being in the moves list and character bios. The visuals and sound are both rated highly, with the reviewer noting the nostalgic tunes and great effects. Overall, Super Smash Bros. Gets a glowing verdict, being called an inventive, innovative fighting game in a class of its own. The game receives a 90% score. It's a fond memory for Nintendo 64 fans. Roarington Norse. The next page is an import arena preview of Castlevania on the N64, a game that was on many gamers' radar back in the day. Everyone was eager to see how the series would transition to 3D arcade. The review mentions that the US version is out now, and the UK release is slated for April. It notes that the game requires a controller pack for saving, and is priced at around £35, which was fairly standard for new N64 titles. The screenshots show some of the gameplay. The reviewer lightly comments on the graphics, comparing the character's hair to Leon and their jacket to Spandau Ballet, showing some humor. There's also a comment about Nice Doggy, who may have bitten the player's hand. Finally, the advert also points out the game is platforming in 3D. The next page, looks like we're diving into Castlevania for the N64. Remember when that finally dropped? We were all chuffed to see a horror game on the console, even if it wasn't perfect. The reviewer seems to be digging the story and the nods to the old Castlevania feel, but they're not shy about pointing out the camera issues. Bit of a niggle that, especially when you're getting swarmed by skeletons. They mention a Zelda-style lock-on that's about as useful as a chocolate teapot, which sounds about right for the time. There's some talk about the vampires part of the game, with villagers turning into bloodsuckers, and a bit about meeting vampire hunters like Charlie Vincent. Good stuff, that's part of the game. They also reference other Konami 3D adventures like Mystical Ninja and Hybrid Heaven, and suggest they didn't have good enough cameras. Ouch! Ouch! There's a mention of battling a massive skeleton in the Forest of Silence, complete with motorbike riding mates. Sounds a bit bonkers, even for Castlevania. They also mention Zelda, of course, and Shadow Man coming soon. This page features a look at Castlevania on the N64, reminiscing about the atmos and adventure it promised. The reviewer points out the moody day/night system, and the classic Dracula castle setting, with skeletons jumping out at you. The first-person mode gets a mention, and not in a good way. Apparently, it was needed due to a rubbish default camera angle. They mention some throwbacks to previous Castlevania games, with tricky platforms and guillotines. There's a little dig at the sword-wielding knights, and also nods to young Sherlock Holmes. It features the hero Reinhard Schneider, who they mention is from the Belmont clan, with some stakes from previous Castlevania games, and a tough cookie but you could play as Carrie as an alternative. The reviewer talks about camera issues and pixel-perfect jumping being a problem. They also moan about how easy it is to accidentally fall off ledges, and characters sliding when you try to stop. It sounds like the reviewer was a bit disappointed by Castlevania. We had all waited for it for ages, and been privileged to some good video previews. The page also makes mention of Renom being the undead and looking remarkably like Gary Oldman in Dracula, and that he sells items to help you get money. The next page features a review of Castlevania on the Nintendo 64, which was quite a big deal at the time, seeing as it was the first foray into 3D for the series. And Minosa, the reviewer, Tim Weaver, seems a bit conflicted. He notes the game has its moments and the atmosphere is top-notch, like a good horror movie, but it doesn't quite reach the heights they were hoping for, and the camera can be a bit of a pain, as was often the case with early 3D games, He mentions how the game mixes things up with 2 different characters, Schneider and Carrie, offering slightly different takes on the story. He also says that the game has some tough spots, but nothing overly difficult. Tim also highlights the dog statues in the garden maze that come alive, which is like a Ghostbusters reference. He thinks it may be surpassed by other horror titles, like Shadow Man and Resident Evil 64. But until those are released on PAL, Castlevania is still worth checking out. Overall, he gives it a score of 81%. Castlevania and Restra. The next page features reviews for Golden Nugget and Fox Cottage Hoops on the N64. Dual Golden Nugget, blimey, what a niche title. The reviewer, Tim Weaver, seems fairly unenthusiastic, calling it dull, despite having a variety of casino games like poker, blackjack, baccarat, and some old tat like Texan Hold'em. And even some of the casino games include the 7-card stud and Big Six, plus roulette, video poker and a bit of craps that can be gambled on. He mentions the graphics are polygonal, but prefers old-fashioned sprites instead, a 52% score. Still, I am sure it passed some time if you like that sort of thing. Plus rooting. Then there's Fox College Hoops, which sounds even worse. Tim lays it on thick, calling it the worst basketball game in the world. Ouch. The reviewer mentions it like it's a terrible game, like their first attempt at a college sports game. It gets a 25% score. The graphics are competent but not as good as NBA Courtside or NBA Hangtime, and the gameplay is slow and inaccurate. No surprise there then, steer clear. This page from the mag, eh? Import Arena it says at the top, so it's all about the games us Brits couldn't just pop down the shops for back in the day. The main focus is Ganbare Goemon 2 on the N64. Goemon, that blue head, slightly odd ninja chap. The review seems a bit unsure, like the reviewer can't quite put their finger on what to make of it. They mention it's gone back to a 2D style, after a 3D RPG attempt. The reviewer notes the game seems rather odd, but notes the controls and overall feel have had a lot of work spent on them. There are screenshots of the gameplay that show some interesting bits like a skeleton boss. One shot shows the character chatting to locals. Another shows a huge doll looming in the background of one level. There are smaller snippets of information on Goemon 2, which includes the game being out in Japan and due in the UK in March. They mention the price is around £40. The next page is an Import Arena feature from N64 Magazine, focusing on Ganbare Goemon 2 for the Nintendo 64. The article, titled On the Levels, begins by lamenting how much there is to understand in the game, and how little time there is to do it. It features screenshots of Goemon in action. The writer, Mark Green, highlights the fairly straightforward and slightly tedious left-to-right platforming, mid-level bosses, and the need to collect scrolls. He describes how the RPG stages involve finding characters in towns who offer challenges. He acknowledges the game has a polished feel due to the addition of alternate paths, animated obstacles, and the unique skills of the 4 characters. He complains that the need to repeat levels, the bizarre additions, the day-to-night feature, and unoriginal Goemon impact sections aren't enough to make up for the lack of originality and action. There is some hope that the English translation might improve matters, but the writer is not convinced. He felt the game was repetitive and lacks spark. There is a small section titled, I Think I'm Gonna Dance Now, discussing the game over screen, which features a greasy muscle-bound bloke gyrating on a platform, joined by friends at a hula hoop. There's a section on accessibility, suggesting the translation will help clear things up. The review gives the game a score of 69%. The visuals are described as nice but too sparse and repetitive, the sounds get a positive mention, the mastery is considered smooth but on rails, and the lifespan is deemed to be quite difficult and 2-player is funny. The verdict is that Konami meandered off in the wrong direction after the wonders of Ganbare Goemon 1, making a 2D platformer that felt outdated. There's the N64 logo, and the issue number 85, dated March 1999. This page from N64 Arena brings back memories. It's a review of Snowspeeder, a game trying to ride on the coattails of 1080-degree snowboarding. The reviewer seems a bit underwhelmed, reckons it's just alright, and the controls, especially with the spin move, are a bit naff, although they do point out both skiing and snowboarding are represented. The graphics are okay, but the reviewer isn't impressed. It seems they feel it doesn't quite hit the mark. They give it a 71%, reckons it's like a cake that's not been iced. Ouch! They mention a few other games from Imagineer, like Holy Magic Century, Multi-Racing Championship, J-League Dynamite Soccer, King of Pro Baseball, SimCity 2000, and Kirato Kaiketsu, but they say that none of them were really big hits. There are a few screenshots showing some in-game action, the map showing the shortcuts, and the stage select screen. They also comment on the 1080-degree typography, joking it was an outrage. It also includes a summary table of game information. This page features a look at two rather odd games for the N64, Snowspeeder and Tetris 64. The Snowspeeder review talks about how you have to keep replaying it to upgrade your character, speed, cornering or coolness to get to the end of the game. The reviewer, James Ashton, seems less than impressed, calling it a bad game. Then there's Tetris 64, which was supposed to be the first game with biofeedback using a biopack that clipped to your ear. The idea was that the game would adjust the difficulty based on your pulse. It sounds like a gimmick, and the reviewer clearly wasn't convinced. According to the review, only one of the 3 Tetris games on the cartridge even used the biopack, and the reviewer thought the Game Boy version was better. They conclude that the biofeedback couldn't save it, and the Giga Tetris version destroyed the concept entirely. Overall score for Tetris 64 was a rather low 42%. The reviewer, James Ashton again, seems to indicate that the biopack might be used elsewhere later. There's a section that gives visuals a 3 out of 5, sounds a 2 out of 5, mastery a 3 out of 5, and lifespan a 6 out of 6. The next page features a review of Doraemon 2 for the N64, under the Import Arena section. Right Doraemon, that blue cat thing? Why? The review's kinda mixed, reckons it's a bit basic, like a dumbed-down Mario 64 clone, but in fairness, it's aimed at younger gamers. The reviewer, Jess Bickham, suggests just playing Zelda instead. Cheeky! It's Japanese, so there's loads of text to wade through, but apparently, you can muddle your way through it. Visually, it's colourful but bland, and the music's described as cheesy plinky-plonk, which sounds about right for the time. Got a 52% score, which isn't exactly glowing. There are some screenshots dotted around, showing the game's world and some of the characters, including this strange-looking ugly little freak. There is also a screenshot that reveals the game is called Doraemon 2, Epoch, it's out now, and is a 64M cartridge. For UK release, requires a controller pack and a rumble pack, and costs around £35, so it was one for the kids. This page features a review of Magical Tetris for the N64. The review kicks off by mentioning Capcom are making a Resident Evil game for the N64, which was exciting news back then. The reviewer seemed a bit underwhelmed by Magical Tetris, calling it a Tetris clone, and noting it was Capcom's first 64-bit game. There's a bit about Capcom's history, and why they were late to the N64 party, due to PlayStation's success. The review also mentions the game has a story, but it's in Japanese with no English clues, which is not ideal. There are 2 main modes, Magical and Up-Down Tetris, with the former being a battle game similar to Bust-A-Move and Puyo Puyo. Up-Down Tetris adds attack blocks to the bottom of the screen. Boring to Newfer. The reviewer notes, Tetris purists might not be impressed with the changes to the classic formula. While they say it can be compulsive, it's over too quickly on the normal difficulty. They also felt the 2-player game wasn't as good as other puzzle games. Overall, the review concludes it's not really worth £40, suggesting a rental instead, and mentions better puzzle games like Witrix and Bust-A-Move. It gets a score of 59%. There are also a few screenshots, and some little blurbs like windscreen wiper, explaining a feature in the game. The accessibility is mentioned, stating major options are in English, but the story is not. There's a rating breakdown for visuals, sounds, mastery, and lifespan too. The next page in this issue features a couple of Japanese Nintendo 64 games that never made it to Blighty. First up is Get a Love, Panda Love Unit. The reviewer, Tim Weaver, seems utterly baffled by it, and from the sound of things, rightly so. He jokes about needing to learn Japanese, which was always the bane of importing back then. The game gets mediocre scores, and seems utterly impenetrable due to the language barrier and general oddness. The screenshots show anime-style characters and a town map. Nothing special. The verdict is that it has women you could take home to meet your parents. Lots of Japanese text, but strangely, no pandas. The second game reviewed is Legend of the River King. This one's a fishing role-playing game. The reviewer admits to being bamboozled by it, mainly due to the language barrier. He notes the SNES-era graphics aren't much to look at on the N64, and the fishing elements are not a patch on Zelda. Ocarina of Time's fishing minigame, which we all loved and made us waste hours trying to get the legendary £30 Hylian Loach. The next page features Legend of the River King for the N64. It's under the Import Arena section, so it was a Japanese import at the time. The reviewer, J.E.S. Bickham, seems a bit underwhelmed, giving it a score of 56%. The graphics get a mixed review, terrible SNES-style maps, but scrumptious polygonal fish when you're underwater. Sounds are tinkly and all about fishing. As you'd expect, there is a screenshot of the game where the reviewer says, "More fish. You've just lost this one." Accessibility is a problem, apparently loaded with Japanese text, which would have made it a bit tricky for us back then if we didn't know the language. Mastery is rated low. The fish are lovely, but not much else is going on. Lifespan gets a similar rating. Could be lengthy if you're bilingual. The verdict is a mildly intriguing and quirky fishing game, but not one you'd play for very long. The reviewer even suggests sticking to finding the legendary 30-pound Hylian loach in Zelda. Ouch! It mentions other animals around the island, like rats and snakes and seagulls stealing your fish, which is a bit random. This page of the Club 64 magazine is a typical content layout, with the big news being The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time getting the top guide spot, with Jez rounding up secrets and subgames. I remember that, everyone was desperate for any advantage in that game. There's the usual mailbox section and a how-to guide, with Zelda getting some more Jez-style tipping, whatever that means. Then there's Help Wanted, for reader-submitted guides, this month featuring F-Zero X. Seems like someone needed to get to grips with that game, which was pretty intense at the time. Tips Extra covers Rogue Squadron and South Park, and Dr. Kit's Game Clinic offers solutions to gaming woes. The Nintendo hotline is there for essential gaming advice. A competition is giving away N64 expansion packs. I'm the Best showcases high scores, and Skill Club 64 inches is looking for the world's best gamers. Contact is for buying and selling N64 stuff. The directory has buying advice for N64 games, and lastly there are details on back issues and subscriptions. The bottom corner shows a mini review of Rogue Squadron, Mario Party and Shadow Man. Roo. The next page is the Club 64 mailbox from the magazine, where readers get to have their say. The star letter tackles the idea of customizing N64 controllers, swapping the backs of two different colored controllers. Nintendo had already thought of this with the black and gray combo controller from Japan. The correction corner addresses a few errors from previous issues, someone pointing out a typo in the F1 World Grand Prix I'm the Best League results. Also, there was confusion about a Silicon Valley cheat code being on the wrong page. A reader named Jonathan wrote in to correct the reader regarding Mission Impossible. The quirk for the level with Dowie and Clutter is not quite true. Dowie is on the boat and heads to a tunnel, so Clutter is able to get on the truck. A reader named Michael asks why you can't dual wield in GoldenEye multiplayer like you can in the single player. The magazine explains it would affect the balance of the game. Rillamer Dodot. Chi-Hung wants to know if there's an updated list of codes for the N64 passport, as his UK Zelda version won't work. The magazine points to the mzin.com.hk website, listing codes for 1080 snowboarding, Diddy Kong Racing, NBA Courtside and Yoshi's Story. Finally, Sakib is wondering when the N64 will get a decent fighting game. Considering Tekken 3 and Virtua Fighter 3 are not on the N64, the magazine suggests to check out the Smash Bros review, which is coming to the UK. The next page features the Club N64 mailbox section, where readers write in with their thoughts and questions about games. One reader jokingly suggests that his maths exam was subliminally influenced by Nintendo. I know that feeling when everything reminds you of gaming. There's a query about save game problems with Turok 2 and an LX Tremor Pakak. It's a common problem even now getting peripherals to work. Someone else praises Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and how his wife now understands his love for games. Another reader reports a bug in Zelda when using Deku Nuts against Goma. I remember that glitch now you mention it. Yusuku. A reader compares Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, noting their similarities. I can see that, both great platformers, but Mario will always be king. There's a suggestion for a racing game that mixes bikes and supercars, which sounds like a bit of Gran Turismo and hang on. Finally, there is a short review of Referee 64, a football game where you play as the ref. Sounds different, though I'm not sure I'd be that interested. The next page is from the Mailbox Club section of the magazine, where readers write in with their thoughts and questions. One reader is trying to convince his dad that the Nintendo 64 is better than Tomb Raider on older consoles. Ed chimes in that games like GoldenEye and Zelda make Tomb Raider look primitive by comparison. Another reader mentions noticing a city in America named after San Francisco Rush, and the editor replies with, haha. There's a bit of discussion about Zelda, with one reader's mum not being a fan, prompting Ed to say, she's so wrong. Another reader finds Zelda pant-wettingly exciting, leading to the reply, you can slip into the avuncular whenever you want to with us. A reader seeks a mention for the Golden Files in the March issue, and there's a bit about Ganondorf shouting, Ulrika in battle, and bad guys having an obsession with blonde princesses. A reader jokingly states he blew all four wheels off his car in response to a previous letter, along with another reader who says they were on the bonus track as David Coulthard. There's a letter about the most dangerous F-Zero track, followed by someone else with a similar claim providing Game Boy camera pics to show you. Another reader shares a diagram for a Nintendo Jolt Pack modification to work without batteries. Jachi. Daisy Laheloko writes in to complain about a sexist Zelda advert, asking, "Will thou win the girl, Gorshi? Or will thou play like one?" The editor agrees it wasn't a great advert, and questions why Nintendo's ad agency would potentially alienate half their audience. Finally, there's a So Tell Me This section, with questions about the 4 MB expansion pack, Perfect Dark and Daytel's version of the pack. Rob Fleming asks about the Nintendo's annual game show, Pocket Monsters Pokémon, coming out in the UK, and Pocket Monsters Stadium for the Nintendo 64. The next page, titled Right You Are, from issue 26 of the magazine, features reader reviews. Back in the day we all wanted to get published in this. It's got readers giving their opinions on N64 games. They were asking us if we thought we could do a better job than the magazine's reviewers. Cheeky! First up, Tom Riley from Kent is slating Mission Impossible, reckons it's pants, giving it a measly 49%. He waited 6 months for it, and thinks it's as bad as the film. Ouch. 2. Then Adam Taylor's having a go at Turok 2, calling it style over substance, moaning about the frame rate and that short-ass groin cam, whatever that is. He gives it 50%, reckons it's worse with a RAM pack. Mark Wasu from London seems to be loving Silicon Valley, giving it a whopping 91%. He reckons it's an amazing game with an ingenious idea, despite the dodgy graphics. He's raving about the music and the animal noises. Finally, Jonathan Holmes is singing the praises of Body Harvest, saying it's simple and entertaining, like a Man United-Barcelona clash. He gives it 92%. The page is rounded off with a call to action for readers to send in their own reviews of N64 games, 100 words or less. The bottom has instructions about where to send the reviews into. Vorinta. The next page of How to Club 64 Inches magazine features a focus on all things Zelda, specifically Ocarina of Time, on the Nintendo 64, the best game ever. Where they've tipped Zelda before, Istra. The page highlights previous Zelda coverage and the official Zelda guidebook containing everything in the game. They reviewed The Legend of Zelda in issues 23 and 24, concluding that it's a peerless example of Nintendo doing what they do best, an epic in every sense of the word, and gave the game a 98% score with a Star Game Award. The page has a how-to section on how to find all sorts of stuff in the leg. Yeah, clever guys. Issue 25 has a bafflingly comprehensive guide to finding all the weapons and equipment. Aha! And a double game guide plus 0.14 is a complete walkthrough on how to complete the game in under 60 hours. Handy? You betcha! Tadauer. There are also some small boxes mentioning reviews of Rogue Squadron, Mario Party, and Shadow Man. This page, takes me back. It's a spread from Club 64 magazine, looks like a guide for Zelda, Ocarina of Time. End of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, the headline blares. Written by a certain Jez Bickham, it appears. Warrington Knowles. The image has Link looking a bit fresh-faced there with Epona, his trusty steed. The article's all about giving tips and hints for those of us who might be stuck in Hyrule. The tone is pretty casual, like, "Still playing Zelda? Of course you are." A bit cheeky. It talks about helping you find obscure items and enjoy subgames. Which, back then, was exactly what you needed. The game was massive, you could wander around aimlessly and grow that figurative white beard before finishing it. Good times. March 99 the date says. Where did that time go? Whoa. This page, from a late 90s issue of N64 magazine, is all about snagging masks in The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. It's a guide on how to get your mitts on the Keaton mask, the skull mask, the spooky mask, and the bunny hood. All those essential fashion accessories for young Link. The magazine gives step-by-step instructions on how to offload these masks to various characters around Hyrule for a profit. Remember the Happy Mask Shop? A slightly odd trust system, wasn't it? The guide also touches on the Mask of Truth and the other masks you could borrow. It makes you want to get the Goron, Zora, and Gerudo masks, but they are not really that useful. Warrington Knit. The next page is a Club 64 Inches feature from N64 Magazine, all about The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, specifically how to find all the great pose in Hyrule Field and bottle locations. First up, there's a guide to ghost busting, explaining how to capture great pose using the fairy bow while riding a Pona, and then sell them to the Poe collector in the guardhouse near Hyrule Castle for cash. It even mentions you get a club card, and a little something extra for collecting 10. The guide then gives the locations of 10 great pose dotted around Hyrule Field, pointing out landmarks such as near the tree that stands by the entrance to Lon Lon Ranch, the large grey boulder south from the entrance to Kokiri Forest, and the overhang by Zora's River. Then there's a section titled Bottle It, covering where to find bottles. It mentions that bottles are essential for fairies, milk, and even pose. It details the 4 locations for bottles: the Cuckoo Challenge in Lon Lon Ranch, finding the Cuckoos in Kakiriko Village, getting the note in Lake Hylia after obtaining the silver scale, and the reward from the Ghost Trader for collecting all 10 great pose. This page from N64 Magazine takes us back to simpler times with a walkthrough for Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. The page is titled Foul Play and is a guide to collecting cuckoos, chickens, for the distressed woman in Kakariko Village. It highlights the chicken trick, where you hold a cuckoo, jump from a high place, and glide down. The guide shows the locations of 7 cuckoos around the village. Nothing groundbreaking, but back then, a little help was always appreciated. The next page from N64 Magazine is all about warp portals in Ocarina of Time. I remember those being a godsend. Hyrule was massive, and sometimes you just wanted to get somewhere quickly without mucking about with Epona or playing the same songs over and over. The magazine details the locations of these warp points: Lost Woods, Goron City, Zora's River, Zora's Domain, and Lake Hylia, and which areas they link to. There is also a teaser for lots more Zelda in the next issue. They're asking for readers' Zelda tips, for favorite bits of Zelda, and for people to submit their own ocarina melodies. They even mention The Simpsons and Jurassic Park theme tunes being popular submissions. That sounds about right, everyone loved those tunes back then. The next page in N64 Magazine issue 26 is all about getting those elusive staff ghost times in F-Zero X. It starts with a help wanted ad, encouraging readers to send in their game guides for a chance to win rewards, including a fancy N64 record bag, complete with some exclusive artwork by Overton. The main feature is a guide by Andrew Mills on how to beat the staff ghosts in F-Zero X. Andrew makes a point of noting that it is the game for time trialing, and it's super smooth to boot. He notes that beating those ghosts is a serious challenge, unlike those in Mario Kart 64. The guide offers general tips, such as using the same craft as the staff ghosts, restarting if you slide even once, and tilting your craft when jumping to maximize distance and speed. He also explains how the settings are described, referring to points on the scale and D-pad taps. There are specific tips for Mute City and Silence 1 tracks, both using the twin Narita craft. It includes settings and staff ghost times, along with advice on taking corners tightly, hitting every zipper, and boosting inside the energy strips. For Silence 1, there's a sequence to hit the zippers, staying close to the right, and holding up on the last 2 laps. It's a real blast from the past, thinking back to trying to shave off those milliseconds to beat the staff ghosts. And it was a real kick in the teeth if you slid even once. The next page, eh? Right then, this is a Club 64 Help Wanted section from the mag, all about how to improve your times in F-Zero X. It's got tips for 6 different tracks: Sand Ocean, Devil's Forest, Big Blue, Port Town, Sector Alpha, and Red Canyon. Each track's got a recommended craft, settings, and the staff ghost time to aim for. They're even giving advice on how to tackle certain corners and zippers, using double taps of the Z and R buttons. It's all fairly standard stuff for the time, really. I mean, who wasn't trying to shave milliseconds off their lap times in F-Zero X back in '99? And remember the King Meteor? That was the ship to have. There are screenshots of the tracks, and stats for the different crafts like the King Meteor, Twin Narita, White Cat, Little Wyvern, and Bloodhawk. Plus, a picture of Jay Tanaka looking like he's just stepped out of a futuristic boy band video. Ah, the 90s. Norsa. The next page of the mag is all about getting those elusive staff ghost times in F-Zero X on the N64. It's got tips for a bunch of tracks like Mute City 2, Whiteland, Firefield, Big Blue 2, Silence 2, Sector Beta, and Red Canyon 2. Each track features a specific craft and settings, along with the staff ghost time to beat. They've even got little screenshots showing the best racing line, plus some advice. For example, on Mute City 2, they reckon hitting the jump on the first lap is key, and to double tap after the tunnel. Remember Twin Narita? A solid, all-rounder craft that was. Rue. On Big Blue 2, the advice is all about double tapping around the corners, especially after the hairpin. The Red Gazelle was always a bit slidey, wasn't it? Good machine for skilled players, but a bit twitchy if you were still getting to grips with F-Zero X. And for Red Canyon 2, they're saying not to go too fast out of the tunnel or you'll fly off the dip. The Bloodhawk was a beast, but a bit of a handful to control. The next page from the magazine is all about getting the best out of F-Zero X on the Nintendo 64. It's a section called Club 64 Help Wanted, and they're giving tips for beating the staff ghost times on various tracks. they highlight a few courses and recommend specific crafts. For Whiteland 2, they suggest using the twin Norita, saying it's easy to slide in the half-pipe. Mute City 3 is best tackled with the hyperspeeder, making sure to hit all the jump panels for extra speed. Sounds like that is the best way to do it then. The Night Thunder is recommended for Devil's Forest 3, advising players to boost on the uphill sections. Rainbow Road, that notoriously difficult track, should be tackled with the Night Thunder. They also recommend Spaceplant with the Mighty Hurricane and Sand Ocean 3 using the Bloodhawk, emphasizing tight corners and the use of speed boosts. Finally, Big Hand is also best with the Bloodhawk, suggesting sticking to a straight line on the ice and boosting out of tight corners. Port Town 2, again the Night Thunder is the choice, advising double tapping around the corners. Each section includes the recommended settings for the craft, the Staff Ghost time to beat, and some specific tips for that track. The next page is a collection of cheat codes and tips for a few games on the Nintendo 64, mostly sports titles. First up is IS-98, an international superstar soccer game. There's a code to unlock all-star teams, and another one that seems a bit convoluted, involving a bunch of directional inputs on the C buttons and pressing XY. Then there's Top Gear Overdrive, a racing game. They've got cheats to unlock all the cars and a bonus hot dog car, unlocked via menu selections, and then pressing the XY button. Bonus hot dog car? What were they thinking? Finally, there's a hefty selection of codes for NFL Quarterback Club 99. These cover everything from making players always fumble or become fat, to adding fireballs, flubberballs, landmines, and pinball players. There's even a hidden character called the Good Mister, who can be found on the Dallas Cowboys team under Emmitt Smith Odd. There are also different modes: racquetball, rugby, slippery, and slow motion play. Plus codes for skinny players, super kickers, and unlimited turbo. Loads of codes, all a bit silly really. Warrant. This page from Club 64 Tips Extra is a proper blast from the past. It's got tips and cheats for a few games that were all the rage back in the day. First up, there's Rogue Squadron, where you could unlock the Millennium Falcon by entering FARMBOY as a password. There are tips for increased difficulty, infinite lives, music menus and ship gallery, radar codes and cutscenes. Then there's South Park, with cheat codes to unlock all characters, weapons, invincibility, level select, a pen and ink mode, unlimited ammo, and the credits. There's a list of bonus characters unlockable in multiplayer mode by entering passwords. Some of the bonus characters include Skinny, Mr. Mackey, Bar Brady, Big Gay Al, Ned, Starvin Marvin, Philip, Terrence, Mr. Garrison, Chef, Wendy, Pip, Ike, Mrs. Cartman, Mephisto, Jimbo, and Alien. Finally, there's a classic tip for Banjo-Kazooie. If you go back to Banjo's house, after clearing the underwater treasure room in Treasure Trove Cove, and look at the picture of bottles, you'll unlock some puzzle-based subgames, which, when completed, unlock cheats. The next page features Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, a recurring advice column. The doc is in surgery. Well, he's ready to solve our N64 gaming woes. Stephen from Irvine is struggling with a Silicon Valley level on what looks like a platformer, while Ben from Swanscombe is having a blast core dilemma. The doctor dispenses tips on how to overcome the challenge. Luke from Ickenham has got himself in a right pickle in Zelda Ocarina of Time with riding the horse. Tut tut, says the doc, while Kyle from Pinchbeck needs help with Turok 2. Seems like the doctor is taking diazepam for this. Tom from Winslow is asking the question on everyone's lips: how do I unlock the Triforce? And the doctor is having none of it, calling it an internet rumor. There is a section dedicated to people writing in with their gaming questions, along with Dr. Kit's replies. The good doc is ready to cure our gaming ailments with his unnaturally cold national health hands. There is a form to cut out and send in your gaming questions if you are struggling with a particularly tricky part of the game, or maybe just to ask the doctor anything. The next page features a You're Through to the Nintendo Splash and a Q&A section focused on The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It starts with a slightly tongue-in-cheek intro about rescuing Zelda and the state of Hyrule, saying Epona has colic, Impa is off buying new clothes, and even Ganondorf has buggered off to Tenerife. The Q&A section addresses common problems players were having, such as getting the Kokiri sword, navigating the Deku Tree, finding Princess Zelda and waking the sleeping man. It's quite funny, the answers are pretty straightforward, and there's even a reference to softly softly catchy monkey when talking about sneaking past the guards. It gives me a chuckle, remembering all the times I was stuck in the bloody Deku Tree at the time. Sure. The next page features the Nintendo Hotline, which, back in '99, was a lifeline for gamers stuck in a tricky spot. The service offered advice on all things Nintendo. Apparently, they dealt with a fair few calls. It was open 7 days a week. There's a Q&A section tackling Zelda questions, including how to progress in Ocarina of Time, after visiting Princess Zelda and what to do with boxes. Also, there's a section on other bits, discussing masks in Ocarina of Time, obtainable from the Happy Mask Shop. It also mentions the sinking lure, plus a brief bit on shaker stones and how hitting them with your sword reveals the time, and the Mask of Truth gives you hints if you chat to them. An automated hotline service also had just become available. You can get help with games, even into the wee small hours. Calls cost 50p a minute, which probably cost you a fortune. This page, blimey, it's a right blast from the past, isn't it? We're talking about the N64 expansion pack here, remember that? It's all about how to stick one of these bad boys into your Nintendo 64 to get a bit more oomph out of your games. The article starts by saying that slotting in a 4 MB expansion pack hook makes games like Turok 2 and Rogue Squadron look as good as those on PC. Now that's a bit of an overstatement, isn't it? Cheshu, Enshu. Worrying. There's a how-to guide, with photos of some poor bloke struggling to install the thing. Apparently, the special tool that comes with it is rubbish. Typical. He's even resorting to using a spoon he found in his Asta carrier bag. Now that's dedication. Dilla. As for the games that'll benefit, they mention a few upcoming titles like Shadowman, Duke Nukem, Zero Hour, World League Soccer 99, Vigilante 8, and even Perfect Dark. It was all about getting better graphics on the N64, a bit late in the console's life to be fair. There's also a joke about little Jess nicking someone else's expansion pack and getting punched in the head for it. Bit harsh, innit? Then there's a final photo of the bloke looking a bit worse for wear after his expansion pack installation. The next page features a competition called Pansion Expansion where the prize is an N64 expansion pack. Remember those? It was sponsored by Excitement Direct, who were flogging all sorts of N64 gear at the time. The instructions were simple. Just send your name and address on a postcard. The closing date was April 5th. There's also a results section listing the winners of a take cart competition. 10 lucky readers won action replay cartridges, those cheat devices that were all the rage back then. Joe Santee from Norfolk, Ian Nimmersmith from Malvern, and Christopher Parsons from Ware were among the winners. Finally, there's a There Goes My Lunch competition, where the grand prize was an N64 console and a copy of Wipeout 64, plus 9 runner-up copies of the game. Jamie Book from Derbyshire was the lucky winner. Some of the runners-up were Farzin Hafezparast from Amersham and Fron Hevlog from Anglesey. The next page is all about bragging rights, innit? I'm the best, it yells, daring you to prove 'em wrong. They're looking for folks to send in their top scores, and if you're good enough, you might just get your name in the mag. There's a star performance section, where some bloke named Stuart Richards from Surrey is showing off his Legend of Zelda skills. Biggest fish caught, horse race time, archery score, the works. Seems he's bagged himself an N64 record bag for his troubles, good on him. Then there's a bit about F-Zero X. They're showing off the fastest time they received for Mute City 3. Some fella called Sam Fenwick managed 1:48.282, earning himself a fancy Mako pad. This month's time to beat is Turok 2. They want to see your fastest times for the first level. Reckon anything under 60 minutes is a decent start. Of course, there's GoldenEye 007, with lists of fastest times for various levels like Caverns, Bunker 2, Control and Cradle. Stelios Giamorelos seems to be the king of Caverns and Bunker 2. Sam Fenwick shows up again in the Cradle times. Cool. They've got Legend of Zelda times and scores too. Stuart Richards is back, showing off in the Big Fish Court, horse race and archery score, all from Surrey. Finally, there's Fighter's Destiny. Enko Bodie and James Green are battling it out for the top spot. This page features the Club 64 contact section. Right at the top, a header asking for cheap games, money to be made, fanzines for sale, help at hand. What more could you ask for? There are plenty of N64 games listed for sale or wanted. Titles like Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, WWF Warzone, Extreme G, Diddy Kong Racing, and ISS 64. Someone's looking for old SNES or SNES games, and someone else has a Mega Drive with a load of games. There are also various PlayStation and even some NES games up for grabs. In the games to swap section, someone wants to trade Ultra Racer 64, and there are offers to trade various games for other titles, like Extreme G, Snowboard Kids, Quake, and more. It's like a digital car boot sale for gamers. The next page delves into the frankly chaotic release of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time back in December '98. The writer, James Price, kicks off by questioning if you got your copy on time, painting a picture of disappointed gamers when the game was released. The article, Wish It Was Here, focuses on the issues surrounding launch day, mentioning how tough it was to get a copy, even for the N64 Magazine team themselves. There is a screenshot of Link swimming in Lake Hylia. He also describes the lengths people considered going to in order to snag a copy, like stealing one. I mean, we all remember the desperation. It touches on how N64 owners traveled to ask others about their experiences in getting the game. It was a nightmare, all right. The next page is an N64 special investigation feature, and it looks at the launch of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. We've got some snippets from various folks encountered in game shops, clearly feeling the pinch of Zelda mania. There's James, who apparently looks shifty and is a fan of GoldenEye and Mario Kart, plus there's Tom and his gunshot wound. I remember those days of trying to find a copy of Zelda. Some shops had to get creative with excuses, and some even had kids crying over not getting a copy. One of the chaps had just bought a new PC with all the latest games, but then he got Zelda and hasn't touched the PC since, which rings true. Everyone just wanted to play Zelda. Young Tom's mum had to go all the way to London to find a copy for him for Christmas. She said no when he asked to play it before Christmas. There's also Jeremy Saunders, who was caught loitering and turns out to be an area manager for Games Exchange. The magazine staff even said, pull his hair and kick him when he's down, which is a bit mean. The games discussed include Zelda, Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye, Mario Kart, and Diddy Kong Racing. The next page in the magazine is a special investigation, focusing on The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, for the Nintendo 64. The article's main thrust is about how Nintendo seemingly underestimated demand for the game, a sentiment echoed by store owners who had been taking pre-orders for an incredibly long time. It features quotes from a few retail staff. One from a bloke named Matt at EB, who comes across as a bit of a PlayStation fanboy, saying people should compare Zelda to Final Fantasy V too. Can you imagine? There is also Jamie, who was visiting HMV with his dad and who already had a copy of Zelda by the sounds of things. Corrington. There are also interviews with store managers, talking about the Zelda shortages and distressed kids, which at the time was hard to believe. The images on the page include the retail staff, and in the background some point-of-sale displays. This page of N64 Magazine is teasing the upcoming review of Jet Force Gemini. They were late with it last month, but this time they promise a full investigation of what they're calling the year's first blockbuster. Quite the claim. Elsewhere in the magazine they're covering Mario Party and Duke Nukem. Time to kill for the N64. The Duke's back to kick some alien ass. That's what his mum told us anyway. Next month's Planet Game Boy section features Conker's Pocket Tales, Rare's first foray into the Game Boy, and Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. Finally, there's a tip section for Star Wars, Rogue Squadron, with Daniel Glenfield apparently sorting us out with his extensive guide to all the tough bits. This page is from issue 27 of a gaming mag boasting 148 pages dedicated to Nintendo 64. First Looks features upcoming games. There is Looney Tunes Space Race, which looked promising but ended up a bit meh, Revolt, which was a decent little racer. The reviewed section gives a verdict on released games. Beetle Adventure Racing, Snowboard Kids 2, and WCW Nitro 64. The magazine interviews David Dienspier, the creative director at Iguana US, discussing their plans for Turok 2, and incredibly, the first details on Turok 3. There's also the 1999 N64 Reader Awards, in association with W.H. Smith, listing the top 20 games as voted for by the readers. There are first news on new N64 games, stacks of all new tips and cheats, Japanese and American games reviewed, I'm the Best, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, every single N64 game reviewed and rated, and also promises the only reviews you can trust. There is also a free double game guide, plus 2 more games get the full tips treatment, and a rather special N64 magazine free gift. The magazine is on sale Monday, March 22nd, 1999, and includes all magazine contents and free gifts, subject to change. A guide to Zelda, Ocarina of Time is shown. This page, it's a what-if scenario, a bit of a daft one actually. The premise is, what if Blastcore, that Rare game where you bulldoze stuff, had a sequel? And what if the bad guys were the Cause, the Irish band? A bit random, isn't it? They're imagined as giant robots apparently. The reviewer, Tommy Squeaker, seems a bit too keen on the whole thing, especially the violinist. I think he needs to calm down. There are screenshots of the game, with the Cause photoshopped in as enemies. First remember Blastcore, it was alright, good fun for a bit of destruction. Whether this proposed sequel is a good idea or not, Depends on who you ask. Warrington Mies. Then there's an index to the mag. All-Star Tennis Review, An Ear to the Ground, An Englishman in Tokyo, and the usual stuff, previews and reviews. Games like Battle Tanks Review, Castlevania Review, Chameleon Twist 2 Review, Doraemon 2 Review, FIFA 99 Review, Goemon 2 Review, Legend of the River King Review, Magical Tetris Review, Milo's Astro Lanes Review, Shadowgate Preview, Smash Bros Review, Snow Speeder Review, Taz Express Preview, Tetris 64 Review and Winback Preview. It also lists articles on general topics, like finding all sorts of stuff in The Legend of Zelda, a special investigation, and tips and tricks. The magazine hits the shelves on February 23rd with the next one, coming March 22nd.